Hello, guys. This is Saubhagya, and welcome to this brand new podcast series, The Saga Edifice, where you could take a trip down memory lane or explore the de novo. This series is about rejuvenating the little one within all of us and a lot of other things too with which you'd be acquainted throughout our journey. This wouldn't be a bibliosmia, but I'm sure you are a book enthusiastic. How do I know this? Hmm, you guys are here, aren't you? Well, it's the 25th of December. Merry Christmas, y'all! But Christmas is incomplete without a Christmas carol. So today's narration is on one of the most famous novels of Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol. Charles Dickens, 1812 to 1870, was a British writer. Not just a writer, but he's also considered a word stylist, and his writing style is popularly known as the Dickens style, where the writings are heavily detailed. But apart from his priority of relaying a message, as a writer, he was also interested in creating beautiful prose. Dickens had written a dozen of novels, among which the Pickwick Papers, 1836, was his first. All of Dickens' works were written in the early Victorian era. Some of his other works are Oliver Twist, Bleak House, and Great Expectations, to name a few. Set in the Victorian London as well, A Christmas Carol is believed to be a response by the writer presenting his argument against the British social attitudes towards poverty. Also, though the story is fictional, Dickens drew inspiration from real places and people. This book is divided into 5 chapters, which Dickens titled Stave. A brief overview of the characters that you'll come along. The story revolves around Ebenezer Scrooge, a man who is completely against the spirit of Christmas. Jacob Marley, Scrooge's business partner, now dead for 7 years. The three spirits: the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Bob Cratchit, Scrooge's clerk, his wife Mrs. Cratchit, and 3 children: his daughter Martha and 2 sons, Peter and Tiny Tim. Fan, Scrooge's dead sister, and Fred, Scrooge's nephew and Fan's son. Now, without any further ado, let's hop right into it. Stave 1: Marley's Ghost. On a frigid, foggy Christmas Eve in London, a shrewd, mean spirited cheapskate named Ebenezer Scrooge works meticulously in his counting house. Outside the office creaks a little sign reading, Scrooge and Marley. Jacob Marley, Scrooge's business partner, has died 7 years ago. Inside the office, Scrooge watches over his clerk, a poor, diminutive man named Bob Cratchit. The smouldering ashes in the fireplace provide little heat, even for Bob's tiny room. Despite the harsh weather, Scrooge refuses to pay for another lump of coal to warm the office. Suddenly, a ruddy faced young man bursts into the office, offering holiday greetings and an exclamatory "Merry Christmas!" The young man is Scrooge's jovial nephew Fred, and the son of his dead sister Fan, who has stopped by to invite Scrooge to Christmas dinner. The grumpy Scrooge responds with a "Bah, humbug!" refusing to share in Fred's Christmas cheer. After Fred departs, a pair of portly gentlemen enter the office asking Scrooge for a charitable donation to help the poor. Scrooge angrily replies that prisons and workhouses are the only charities he's willing to support, and the gentlemen leave empty handed. Scrooge confronts Bob Cratchit, complaining about Bob's wish to take a day off for the holiday. What good is Christmas? Scrooge snipes that it should shut down Bus Ines. He begrudgingly agrees to give Bob a day off, but insists that he arrive at the office all the earlier the next day. Scrooge follows the same old routine, taking dinner in his usual tavern and returning home through the dismal, fog blanketed London streets. Just before entering his house, the door knocker on his front door, the same door he has passed through twice a day for his many years, catches his attention. A ghostly image in the curves of the knocker gives the old man a momentary shock. It's the peering face of Jacob Marley. When Scrooge takes a second, refocused look, he sees nothing but a door knocker. With a disgusted "Pooh, pooh!" Scrooge opens the door and trudges into his bleak quarters. He makes little effort to brighten his home. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. As he plods up the wide staircase, Scrooge, in utter disbelief, sees a locomotive hearse climbing the stairs beside him. After rushing into his room, Scrooge locks the door behind him and puts his dressing gown. As he eats his gruel before the fire, the carvings of his mantelpiece suddenly transform into images of Jacob Marley's face. Scrooge, determined to dismiss the strange vision, blurts out, "Humbug!" The bells in the room fly up from the tables and begin to ring sharply. Scrooge hears footsteps thumping up the stairs. A ghostly figure floats through the doors. Jacob Marley, transparent and bound in chains. Scrooge shouts in disbelief, refusing to admit that he sees Marley's ghost. A strange case of food poisoning, he claims. The ghost begins to murmur. He has spent 7 years wandering the earth in his heavy chains as punishment for his sins. Scrooge looks closely at the chains and realizes that the links are forged of cash boxes, padlocks, ledgers, and steel purses. The wraith tells Scrooge that he has come from beyond the grave to save him from this very fate. He says that Scrooge will be visited by 3 spirits over the next 3 nights, the first two appearing at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the final spirit arriving at the last stroke of midnight. He rises and backs towards the windows, which opens almost magically, leaving a trembly Scrooge white with fear. The ghost gestures Scrooge to look out the window, and Scrooge complies. He sees a throng of spirits, each bound in chains. They wail about their failure to lead honorable, caring lives and their inability to reach out to the others in need as they and Marley disappear into the mist. Scrooge stumbles to his bed and falls instantly asleep. Stave 2. The first of the 3 spirits. Scrooge awakes at midnight, which leaves him baffled. It was well after 2 a.m. when he went to bed. Initially, he thinks he has slept through an entire day, or that it's actually noon and the sun has merely gone under some sort of cover. He suddenly remembers the words of Marley's ghost. The first of the 3 spirits will arrive at 1 o'clock. Frightened, Scrooge decides to wait for his supernatural visitor. At 1 o'clock, the curtains of Scrooge's bed are blown aside by a strange, childlike figure emanating an aura of wisdom and a richness of experience. The spirit uses a cap to cover the light that glows from its head. The spectre softly whispers to Scrooge that he is the ghost of Christmas past and orders the mesmerized man to rise and walk with him. The spirit touches Scrooge's heart, granting him the ability to fly. The pair exit through the window. The ghost transports Scrooge to the countryside where he was raised. He sees his old school, his childhood mates, and familiar landmarks of his youth. Touched by these memories, Scrooge begins to sob. The ghost takes the weeping man into the school where a solitary boy, a young Ebenezer Scrooge, passes the Christmas holiday all alone. The ghost takes Scrooge on a depressing tour of more Christmases of the past. The boy in the schoolhouse grows older. At last, a little girl, Scrooge's sister Fan, runs into the room and announces that she has come to take Ebenezer home. Their father is much kinder, she says. He has given his consent to Ebenezer's return. The young Scrooge, delighted to see his sister, embraces her joyfully. The aged Scrooge regretfully tells the ghost that Fan died many years ago and is the mother of his nephew, Fred. The ghost escorts Scrooge to more Christmases of the past, including a merry party thrown by Fezziwig, a merchant with whom Scrooge apprenticed as a young man. Scrooge later sees a slightly older, yet still boyish version of himself in conversation with a lovely young woman named Bella. She is breaking off an engagement, crying that greed has corrupted the love that used to impassion Scrooge's heart. The spirit takes Scrooge to a more recent Christmas scene where a middle aged Belle reminisces with her husband about her former fiancé Scrooge. The husband says that Scrooge is now quite alone in the world. The older Scrooge can no longer bear these gripping visions. He begs the ghost of Christmas past to take him back to his home. Tormented and full of despair, Scrooge seizes the ghost's hat and pulls it firmly over the top of the mystical child's head, dimming the light. As the inextinguishable luminous ray floods downward onto the ground, Scrooge finds himself zipped back into his bedroom, where he stumbles to bed yet again and falls asleep immediately. Stave 3. The second of the three spirits. The church clock strikes 1, startling Scrooge, who awakes in mid snore. Glad to be awake, he hopes to confront the second spirit just as it arrives. The echoes of the church bell fade, however, and no ghost appears. Somewhat disappointed, Scrooge waits for 15 minutes, after which a bright light begins to stream down upon him. Curious and a bit befuddled, Scrooge pads into the other room, where he finds the second spirit waiting for him. The figure, a majestic giant clad in green robes, sits atop a throne made of a gourmand feast. In a booming voice, the spirit announces himself as the ghost of Christmas present. He tells Scrooge that he has more than 1,800 brothers and his lifespan is a mere single day. The spirit orders Scrooge to touch his robe. Upon doing so, the feast and the room vanish instantly, and Scrooge finds himself alongside the spirit in the midst of a bustling city on Christmas morning. Blissful passers-by take pleasure in the wondrous sights and smells abounding through the shop doors. People merrily shovel snow, tote bags of presents, and greet one another with a cheery Merry Christmas. The spirit takes Scrooge to the meagre home of Bob Cratchit, where Mrs. Cratchit and her children prepare a Christmas goose and savor the few Christmas treats they can afford. The oldest daughter, Martha, returns from her job at a Mellor. The oldest son, Peter, wears a stiff-collared shirt, a hand-me-down from his father. Bob comes in carrying the crippled young tyke, Tiny Tim, on his shoulders. The family is more than content despite its skimpy Christmas feast. Scrooge begs to know whether Tiny Tim will survive. The spirit replies that given the current conditions in the Cratchit house, there will inevitably be an empty chair at next year's Christmas dinner. The spirit takes Scrooge to a number of other Christmas gatherings, including the festivities of an isolated community of miners and a party aboard a ship. He also takes Scrooge to Fred's Christmas party, where Scrooge loses himself in the numerous party games and has a wildly entertaining time, though none of the party guests can actually see him. As the night unfolds, the ghost grows older. At last, Scrooge and the ghost come to a vast and desolate expanse. Here, the ghost shows Scrooge a pair of starving children who travel with him beneath his robes. The names are Ignorance and Want. Scrooge inquires if nothing can be done to help them. Mockingly, the ghost quotes Scrooge's earlier resort. Are there no prisons? Are there no warehouses? The spirit disappears as the clock strikes midnight and Scrooge eyes a hooded phantom coming towards him. Stave 4. The Last of the Spirits. The phantom, a menacing figure clad in a black hooded robe, approaches Scrooge. Scrooge involuntarily kneels before him and asks if he is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. The phantom does not answer, and Scrooge squirms in terror. Still reeling from the revelatory experiences with the last two spirits, Scrooge pleads with the ghost to share his lesson, hopefully that he may avoid the fate of his deceased partner. The ghost takes Scrooge to a series of strange places. The London Stock Exchange, where a group of businessmen discuss the death of a rich man. A dingy pawn shop in the London slum, where a group of vagabond and shady characters sell some personal effects stolen from a dead man. The dinner table of a poor family, where a husband and wife express relief at the death of an unforgiving man to whom they owed money. And the Cratchit household, where the family struggles to cope with the death of Tiny Tim. Scrooge begs to know the identity of the dead man, exasperated in his attempts to understand the lesson of the silent ghost. Suddenly, he finds himself in a churchyard where the spirit points him towards a freshly dug grave. Scrooge approaches the grave and reads the inscription on the headstone: Ebenezer Scrooge. Appalled, Scrooge clutches at the spirit and begs him to undo the events of his nightmarish vision. He promises to honor Christmas from deep within his heart and to live by the moralizing lessons of past, present, and future. The spirit's hand begins to tremble, and as Scrooge continues to cry out for mercy, the phantom's robe shrinks and collapses. Scrooge, again, finds himself returned to the relative safety of his own bed. Stave 5. The End of It. Scrooge, grateful for a second chance at his life, sings and praises of the spirits and of Jacob Marley. Upon realizing he has been returned to Christmas morning, Scrooge begins shouting "Merry Christmas" at the top of his lungs. Genuinely overjoyed and bubbling with excitement, Scrooge barely takes time to dress and dances while he shaves. In a blur, Scrooge runs into the streets and offers to pay a first boy he meets a huge sum to deliver a great Christmas turkey to Bob Cratchit. He meets one of the portly gentlemen who earlier sought charity for the poor and apologizes for his previous rudeness, promising to donate huge sums of money to the poor. He attends Fred's Christmas party and radiates such heartfelt bliss that the other guests can hardly manage to swallow their shock at his surprising behavior. The following morning, Scrooge arrives at the office early and assumes a very stern expression when Bob Cratchit enters 18.5 minutes late. Scrooge, feigning disgust, begins to scold Bob before suddenly announcing his plan to give Cratchit a large raise and assist his troubled family. Bob is stunned, but Scrooge promises to stay true to his words. As time passes, Scrooge is as good as his word. He helps the Cratchits and becomes a second father to Tiny Tim, who does not die as predicted in the ghost's ominous vision. Many people in London are puzzled by Scrooge's behavior, but Scrooge merely laughs off their suspicions and doubts. Scrooge brings a little of the Christmas spirit into every day, respecting the lessons of the Christmas more than any man alive. The narrator concludes the story by saying that Scrooge's word and thoughts should be shared by all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. Well, guys, A Christmas Carol is a wonderful script to rejoice the spirit of Christmas within all of us. Ebenezer Scrooge sure was a lesson to all those who've lost their way through time. I really hope you enjoyed it. So, that's all for today's show, and stay tuned with us because we have a long way to go together. Don't forget to check out The Talking Show starring my friend from afar, Abik Sarkar, and see you in the next episode. Love ya!
Swami!